It was one of those bone-chilling Ohio mornings in late November when even the neon signs seemed too cold to glow properly. The sun hadn't yet broken through the overcast sky, and the entire city felt wrapped in a wet gray towel, heavy, silent, suffocating. At the center of downtown Columbus stood the River Park Mall, a gleaming monument of consumerism, its glass facade glowing faintly from the fluorescent lights within. It was early, barely 7:10 a.m., and most of the mall was still asleep, except for the 24-hour ATM corridor near the north entrance. A man approached the corridor with a slight limp. His name was Malcolm Reed. 50 years old, African-American, standing at about 5 feet 9 inches, stocky build, with a heavy jawline and deep crow's feet around his eyes. His salt and pepper beard matched the tired gray of his knitted beanie. He wore a worn black parka over a faded hoodie, khaki pants that were slightly too loose around the waist, and one practical hiking boot. The other leg ended in a sleek titanium prosthetic, a combat grade 1, built for performance and endurance, though most would never know it by looking. Malcolm didn't move fast. Every step was intentional, calculated. He paused every few feet, adjusting his weight ever so slightly to avoid placing too much strain on the connection between his residual limb and the prosthetic. It wasn't pain, not really. It was the memory of pain, a ghost that lingered long after the flesh was gone. He rubbed his hands together and stepped into the warmth of the ATM booth, which smelled faintly of pine-scented floor cleaner and last night's fast food. The cameras overhead blinked red. He didn't look up. He never did. Instead, he pulled out his wallet from his jacket and inserted the card. The screen glowed blue. "Welcome, Mr. Reed. Please enter your PIN." As he reached for the keypad, his fingers trembled, not from cold, but from fatigue. He hadn't slept much. Didn't matter. Today was Veterans Affairs paperwork day, and he needed cash for the bus ride and a cup of coffee to keep his nerves in check. His fingers hovered for a moment. He blinked, cleared his throat, and typed in the 4 digits. Behind him, the mall's main doors hissed open. 3 uniformed police officers walked in. They were just finishing their night shift and had stopped for a final patrol sweep before clocking out. All 3 were white. Officer Raynell, mid-30s, clean-cut, military buzz cut. Officer Jensen, older, tall, with a sharp nose and sharper opinions. And Officer Clay, a rookie, fresh out of the academy, still walking like someone with something to prove. They didn't walk in with sirens or flashlights. Just steady footsteps, purposefully casual, though their eyes moved with a practiced scan. Their attention was quickly drawn to the lone figure limping inside the ATM corridor. "Got one," Jensen murmured. Raynell squinted. "Guy's twitchy. You see that limp?" "Druggy shuffle," Clay said. "He's casing the machine," Raynell added, voice low but decisive. Jensen didn't wait for confirmation. "Let's check him." Inside the booth, Malcolm had just withdrawn his $60 when he caught a faint reflection in the glass, 3 figures approaching fast. A second later, the door flung open. "Hey," one of them barked. Startled, Malcolm turned, one hand gripping his wallet. "What are you doing here?" Raynell asked. Malcolm blinked. "I'm withdrawing my money." "What's the issue?" "You high?" Jensen stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Show me your ID." Malcolm's heart rate spiked. He hated this. Hated the way they always assumed. He kept his voice calm. "I have it. Just give me a second, No sudden moves, Raynell snapped, placing a hand on his holster. Malcolm's fingers hesitated near his jacket pocket. "Listen, I'm not a..." Then it happened. Clay, the rookie, moved first. Without warning, he delivered a hard kick to Malcolm's left side, aiming low. The titanium leg couldn't react like a real one, and Malcolm lost balance. His head slammed into the ATM screen, then the floor. Raynell was next. He moved in and wrapped an arm around Malcolm's neck from behind, trying to subdue him. Malcolm gasped, his voice choked out. "I'm a soldier." Jensen had his gun drawn before Malcolm even knew what was happening. "Hands where I can see them." Malcolm tried to speak, but all that came out was a ragged cough. The weight of 2 grown men pressed down on him, the tile cold beneath his face. His fingers scrabbled for something, anything, to prove he wasn't who they thought he was. Then it rolled out from his wallet. A small, circular badge. Black center, golden edges. Engraved in sharp serif font. Department of Defense, Senior Security Advisor. It spun once on the tile, then stopped. A mall security officer who had been sipping coffee at the far end of the hall dropped his cup when he saw it. He broke into a sprint. "Stop," he screamed. "He's with the Pentagon." Everything froze. Raynell looked down. His breath caught. Jensen's gun didn't lower immediately. "What the?" Clay stepped back like he'd touched fire. Did he say Pentagon? The badge lay between them, glinting coldly under the fluorescent light. Malcolm lay still, his chest heaving. His beanie had come off during the struggle, revealing a jagged scar that ran from the top of his head to behind his ear, a scar that didn't come from anything civilian. The security officer reached them and knelt by Malcolm, shielding him with his arms. "You idiots just assaulted a decorated veteran. That's a DOD badge." Raynell stammered, "We thought he was—" "You thought," the officer roared. "You didn't even ask." A crowd had started to gather. Phones were already out. Someone was live-streaming. The mall lights seemed brighter now, harsher, exposing every detail. Jensen holstered his weapon, face pale. "Sir, we didn't mean." "Don't talk to me," Malcolm rasped, barely audible. "Call my handler." Silence. The crowd was swelling. Words like racist, police brutality, and unarmed veteran echoed from person to person. Someone sobbed. In the chaos, no one noticed the small tear forming in the corner of Malcolm's left eye, not from pain, but from shame. Not for himself, but for the country he had given everything to serve. Again. The next few minutes unfolded in a surreal haze, like the world had been coated in fog and only certain moments pierced through with painful clarity. Malcolm lay on the cold tile, eyes unfocused but alert. The badge still sat on the floor, now surrounded by a halo of phone lights and whispered outrage. The security guard, name tag, Devin, was still crouched protectively over Malcolm, shouting something at the officers. Malcolm didn't register the words. He was listening to the blood thumping in his ears, to the sound of his own ragged breathing, to the distant memory of mortars in Baghdad and the screech of metal scraping sand. His heart beat slow and heavy, like a war drum echoing through his chest. The mall's management had already called an ambulance. It would be minutes, maybe less. But time had slowed. Clay stood frozen near the door. Raynell paced with one hand on his head, muttering to himself, "Shit, shit, shit," and Jensen, cold-eyed, stiff, older than the others, still hadn't said a word. He stared at Malcolm as if trying to rewrite what just happened in his own mind. Devin turned back to Malcolm, speaking gently. "Sir, do you need medical attention?" Malcolm blinked, finally locking eyes with him. "Just my leg, check the socket." Devin nodded and reached carefully toward Malcolm's prosthetic. There was a faint hissing noise as he unlatched the pressure valve and gently tugged. No blood. No breakage. Just a bruise forming at the seam of where real flesh met forged metal. "I'm all right," Malcolm whispered. He sat up, slowly, with Devin helping to steady him. The crowd clapped. Not for the police. For Malcolm. Then came the cameras. News vans had arrived by the time the paramedics entered the scene. Microphones were shoved forward. "Sir, are you okay? Can you tell us what happened? Were you targeted because of your race? Did the officers know who you were?" Malcolm didn't answer. Not out of fear, but from exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones. The kind that doesn't let you speak until you're sure the moment won't consume you. One of the paramedics helped him into a chair and checked his vitals. "Name?" she asked softly. "Malcolm Reed," he said, his voice steadier now. "Any allergies, medications?" He shook his head. Then added, "Just scars." The woman gave him a look, part sympathy, part confusion. But she didn't press. She wrote something on her clipboard and turned away. Malcolm took a slow breath and looked around. The three officers had backed away now. They stood behind the glass wall like outsiders looking in. Strangers to their own story. The moment had left them. He finally spoke. "I want your badge numbers." Raynell was the first to react. He stepped forward, hands raised, expression apologetic. "Sir, please understand. It was a misidentification. We thought. You didn't think—" Malcolm cut him off. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the kind of voice that carried authority without volume. "You reacted." Clay looked like he was going to be sick. He leaned against the wall, staring at the floor. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. "You're new," he said to him. "Aren't you?" Clay nodded. "Then listen carefully. What you just did. That wasn't policing. That was fear. Fear of a man who didn't look like you. You see a limp and you assume addiction. You see a hoodie and you assume danger. You see skin like mine, and you think you're in control." Clay's lips moved. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't." "You didn't know," Malcolm said. "But you didn't ask either." The rookie's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I'll never forget this. Make sure you don't." By now, the mall had cordoned off the area. Devin, the security officer, spoke into a radio and nodded at Malcolm. "They want to take you to the medical wing, sir. Privacy. Quiet. You okay to walk?" Malcolm nodded and slowly rose, adjusting his prosthetic. Every movement was a reminder of how easily this could have ended differently. He turned to Jensen, the only one who hadn't spoken. "You got anything to say?" Malcolm asked. Jensen stared back at him, jaw clenched. "You people always want to play victim." A hush fell over the crowd. Malcolm tilted his head. "You people?" Jensen blinked, realizing too late what had escaped his mouth. Raynell took a half-step back from him, like distancing himself from the blowback. Clay looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Devin growled, "You just made this a civil rights case." Malcolm gave a humorless chuckle. "I don't need to play victim. You did all the work for me." He turned and walked, one slow step at a time, toward the elevator that led to the medical wing. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, silent but watching. Phones still rolling. Hashtags already trending. Hashtag Malcolm Reed. Hashtag disabled veteran. Hashtag police brutality. Hashtag duty hero. Hashtag he served. Upstairs, in the quiet medical lounge of the mall's admin wing, Malcolm sat on a cushioned bench while a nurse cleaned the scrape on his cheek. He looked out the window at the parking lot below. Lights flashing. Reporters circling like vultures. And somewhere in the mess, someone was crying. It wasn't his fault, but it was his burden. The nurse, a petite woman with freckles and red hair tied in a bun, broke the silence. "You're a real soldier, huh?" He nodded. 3 tours. Iraq, 2003 to 2011. She wiped his face gently. "Thank you for your service." He gave a tight smile. "You're the first to say that today." There was a knock at the door. A woman in a gray suit stepped in. Sharp, poised, and visibly agitated. She held up a badge, federal level. "Mr. Reed," she said briskly. "I'm Agent Carter, Defense Intelligence Oversight. I need to speak with you immediately." Malcolm sighed. "It's already everywhere, isn't it?" Carter didn't smile. "We've had 38.2 million views in the last 2 hours across platforms. CNN just aired it. Fox is preparing a segment. Twitter is a war zone. The secretary is asking if we should release a formal statement." Malcolm stared out the window again. "And what do you think?" Carter hesitated. "I think it's up to you. We can spin this, or we can silence it." He turned to face her. "Why would I want to silence it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she placed a tablet on the table and tapped it. A paused video loaded, a clear angle from the mall camera. The moment of the kick, the fall, the badge, the gasp. Carter looked at him. "Do you want to go public?" Malcolm leaned back. "Let me tell you a story." Carter blinked. "I'm listening. 5 years ago, I was in Virginia. I pulled into a gas station at 2 a.m. Needed to stretch my leg, after a long drive. I was in full suit. Car had Pentagon plates. Still, I got asked to move along. No reason. Just move along. I didn't make a scene. Didn't flash my badge. Just left." He paused. "But that night, I realized something. They don't care what you do. Just what you look like." Carter nodded slowly. "So yeah," Malcolm said. "We go public." Outside, the mall was swarming. Protesters had arrived. Signs waved in the air. "Justice for Malcolm. No badge stops brutality. Heroes deserve respect." And in the center of it all, standing on a makeshift stage built from crates and chairs, was Devin, the security guard, holding up the badge, telling the story, calling for accountability. In that moment, Malcolm watched from above, silent. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just breathed. And for the first time all day, he felt the weight shift slightly off his shoulders. Just slightly. 2 days had passed since the incident at River Park Mall, but for Malcolm Reed, it may as well have been 2 years. The world outside was different now. Frenzied, loud, electrified. But inside his modest 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of Columbus, silence reigned. The news hadn't stopped. Headlines churned out by the hour. Pentagon advisor assaulted by police. Mistaken identity? Or systemic failure? Disabled veteran tackled at ATM. Nation reacts. Footage replayed constantly. The kick, the fall, the badge spinning on cold tile. It had become a symbol, An image burned into the collective consciousness of a restless public. But Malcolm didn't watch any of it. The television in his living room remained off. He didn't check his phone. He barely touched food. What he did do repeatedly was open and close a drawer in his bedroom. Inside, under a stack of folded socks and 2 service medals, lay a sealed envelope. Yellowed edges. Stiff paper. Unopened for years. He pulled it out, turned it in his hands, and placed it back. Again and again. The letter was from Lila, his wife. Written during his 3rd deployment, sent with a birthday card. But by the time it arrived, she had already left. Not with anyone else. Just away from the life, from the waiting, from the burden of wondering if Malcolm would come home whole. Or at all. She'd taken their daughter, Nina, with her. They hadn't spoken in 9 years. And now, in this maelstrom of attention and fury, Malcolm found himself craving the quiet he once despised. The world had finally noticed him, but not in the way he wanted. Not for the work. Not for the late nights drafting defense strategies. Not for the way he'd navigated post-military life with 1 leg and 2 jobs. But for how he'd fallen, humiliated, mistaken, misjudged. A knock broke his trance. He ignored it. Another knock, louder this time. He sighed, stood, and walked with a practiced rhythm. 3 solid steps, 1 metallic click. He opened the door. Agent Carter stood there, in a charcoal pantsuit, holding 2 coffee cups. "I brought the strong kind," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to make me talk?" "No. It's supposed to make me human." Malcolm stepped aside. "Come in." They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. Mismatched chairs. A flickering overhead light. The blinds were drawn, though sunlight crept around the edges like an intruder. Carter took a sip. Then, "You've been quiet." "Never liked the sound of my own voice," Malcolm said. "That's not what your records say. Pentagon values your briefings." He shrugged. She leaned forward. "You know this is bigger than you now, right?" He nodded. "We've got people calling for resignations." The governor made a statement. The president might chime in next. Malcolm chuckled dryly. All it took was a broken man getting tackled on camera. "No," Carter corrected. "All it took was the world seeing that even a man like you, respected, decorated, obedient to the core, can still be broken by the system." Malcolm looked down. "That's the problem, isn't it?" Carter hesitated. "We're holding a press conference tomorrow. You don't have to speak, but you should be there." He didn't answer right away. Finally, "Do you think it changes anything?" She exhaled. "I think people listen when the right voice speaks." Malcolm stood, walked to the bedroom, and returned holding the envelope. He handed it to her. "What's this?" "A reminder." She looked at him. "If I speak tomorrow," he said, "it won't just be about me. It'll be for the version of me that never made it home. The ones still limping. The ones without badges. The ones who never had a camera rolling." He paused. "And for the girl who used to sit on my shoulders and call me Iron Man because of this leg." Carter nodded slowly. "You think she saw the video?" he asked. "I think the whole country did." He looked away. That night, Malcolm sat in his recliner, staring at the television. Still off. Then, for the first time in days, he picked up the remote and turned it on. A talk show host was dissecting the incident. Graphics, timelines, opinion panels. But what caught Malcolm's attention wasn't the analysis, it was a face on the screen. Familiar. Older but unmistakable. Nina. Now 19. Shoulder-length curls. Wide, expressive eyes. She was part of a student group speaking at a campus protest. "My father," she was saying, "taught me that honor doesn't always come with medals. Sometimes it comes from standing back up after the world knocks you down." Malcolm dropped the remote. His breath hitched. He hadn't seen her in nearly a decade, and here she was, strong, defiant, carrying his story forward. The next morning, he stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie. Black suit. Clean shave. Shoes polished. He opened the drawer again. The medals were still there. So was the envelope. This time he left the letter. He took the medals. The press conference was held at the Veterans Memorial Hall, a stone building lined with flags and a bronze sculpture of a soldier carrying another on his back. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Inside, the room buzzed with anticipation. Rows of seats filled with reporters, advocates, lawmakers, veterans. The podium stood center stage, flanked by two large screens projecting live feeds. Agent Carter introduced him. Today, we are joined by Malcolm Reed, a man who has given this country more than most ever will. His voice matters. And now you'll hear it. Malcolm approached the mic slowly. He didn't begin right away. Instead, he scanned the room. Found Nina sitting in the front row, eyes brimming with tears. She nodded once. Then he began. I didn't expect to be here today. Pause. I didn't expect to be on your screens, trending on your timelines, turned into a symbol. His voice was steady. Low, but piercing. I served this country because I believed in what it could be, not because of what it was. I went to war knowing I might not come back. And I came back different. Not just in body, but in spirit. He looked out again. A veteran in the third row gave him a fist over the heart. But here's the truth, Malcolm continued. I survived Iraq. But I almost didn't survive Ohio. Murmurs. When I walked into that ATM booth, I wasn't a threat. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't suspicious. I was cold. Tired. Needing cash for a bus ride. He paused again. And yet, in a moment, I was tackled, kicked, restrained, all because I didn't look like safety. I looked like a statistic. Nina wiped her cheek. And I'll say what no one wants to, if I hadn't dropped that badge, I might have died there. The room fell silent. I am not bitter, he said. But I am awake. He reached into his pocket and held up one of his medals. This doesn't protect me from injustice. This doesn't make me immune to fear. But maybe, just maybe, it reminds you that people like me are not what you've been told. He took a breath. I'm Malcolm Reed. I've worn the uniform. I've buried brothers in arms. I've built strategies that protect your cities. And I walk with metal where flesh used to be. A tear slid down his cheek. And yet, I still have to say, out loud, that I belong. He stepped back. No applause. Just silence. Heavy. Reverent. Then, slowly, hands began to clap. First a few. Then a wave. Then a standing ovation. The screens lit up with his name. And for the first time, Malcolm didn't look away. Outside, reporters surged. Nina found her way to him, pushing past cameras and microphones. Dad. He turned. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he pulled her into an embrace so tight it seemed to hold back every word he couldn't say. I saw you, he whispered. I saw you first, she replied. And for the first time in years, Malcolm Reed, soldier, strategist, survivor, allowed himself to cry. Not from pain, but from being seen. The following week passed in a haze of press interviews, legal consultations, and long overdue phone calls. Malcolm Reed had become a reluctant icon, a symbol of strength, survival, and the failure of a system that so often misread the very people who had built it. But he hadn't asked for any of this. The sudden national attention made him uneasy. He didn't trust it. Attention was fickle. Spotlights didn't heal wounds, they exposed them. He stayed in his apartment as much as he could. The couch became both refuge and prison. He stopped answering most calls. He ignored emails from senators, human rights groups, and even a book publisher who wanted him to write a memoir. Everyone wanted a piece of his pain, and Malcolm wasn't sure what he had left to give. But Nina came by almost every day. She'd bring groceries, sit on the edge of the couch, and talk about school, about her childhood memories, about the years in between. At first, he said little. He listened, nodded, sometimes smiled. Slowly, her words began to piece together the time they had lost. I used to hate you, she said once, suddenly. He looked up. I mean, not you, she corrected. Just the version of you that left and never came back. I did come back, he said. Not all of you, she replied gently. He had no response. Only a sigh. Mom kept your medals in a shoebox, she added. Said she didn't want them on the wall because they weren't yours anymore. Malcolm nodded slowly. She's in Denver now. Remarried. He's okay. I guess. He didn't ask anything else. He couldn't. Not yet. Nina took his silence as permission to continue. You should talk to her sometime. I don't know what I'd say. Start with, I'm still here. That night, Malcolm pulled out the envelope again. The one he'd left in the drawer. He slid a letter opener beneath the seal and unfolded the contents for the first time. The paper had yellowed, the ink slightly faded. But the handwriting was unmistakably Lila's. Malcolm, I don't know how to do this anymore. I love you. I always will. But every day, I wonder if the doorbell will ring and it'll be someone telling me you're gone. Nina needs a father she can touch. I need a husband I can talk to. You left so much of yourself over there, and I'm afraid you won't ever come back. If you do really come back, please find us. We'll be waiting. Always, Lila. He read it 3 times. Then he wept. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the quiet release of a man whose body had long since healed, but whose soul had never been told it was safe to come home. 3 days later, Malcolm received a letter from the Department of Defense. Not an email. A letter hand-delivered by a uniformed courier who looked too young to understand what the folded flag on Malcolm's mantle truly meant. Inside was a formal apology from the Secretary of Defense. It came with words like deep regret and failure of protocol. But tucked beneath the carefully crafted statement was something that caught Malcolm by surprise, a personal note, handwritten. Mr. Reed, you once told me in a briefing that perception can kill faster than bullets. You were right. We owe you more than words. Let me know how we can start repaying that debt. J.D. Marshall. Malcolm folded the letter slowly. He wasn't interested in grand gestures. But something inside him stirred, an old instinct buried under years of silence. He stood, walked to the closet, and retrieved an old case, black, hard-shelled, military-issued. Inside was a laptop, dusty but intact. He powered it on. Malcolm's mind returned to the work that had once consumed him, patterns, systems, failures in chain of command. But now he saw everything through a different lens. Not as an analyst, not as a soldier, but as a survivor of the very machine he had helped to operate. He opened a new document. The cursor blinked. And then he began to write. Not a memoir. Not a speech. A proposal. He titled it, Project Sentinel, Community Intelligence for Peace Officers. It was bold. Ambitious. Rooted in everything he had learned, from war zones to street corners, from Pentagon strategy rooms to that freezing mall corridor. He wrote for 12 straight hours. The gist of the proposal was simple yet revolutionary. Embed veteran advisors in police precincts across the country, especially those in diverse communities. Train officers not just in tactical response, but in trauma recognition, de-escalation, and empathy. Create a silent signal system, a subtle ID protocol for veterans with PTSD or disabilities that would alert law enforcement during encounters without compromising privacy. Establish mandatory reflection reviews after incidents involving excessive force, using psychological analysis and narrative testimony, not just body cam footage. He outlined timelines, pilot cities, funding models, legal protections. It wasn't a fix-all, but it was a start. When he finished, he emailed it directly to J.D. Marshall. No subject line, no body text, just the file. He didn't expect an answer, but one came 4 hours later. Let's talk Monday. Bring the girl. We may have something big here. The meeting was scheduled at a federal building in D.C., not the Pentagon, but close enough that the ghosts still whispered. Malcolm wore the same suit from the press conference. Nina came along, dressed in a maroon blazer and white sneakers, trying to look official but still very much a college student. They passed security, signed NDAs, rode an elevator to the 17th floor. Marshall met them in a glass-walled conference room. Older now, grayer, but still sharp-eyed and military stiff. He didn't waste time. This is good, he said, tapping the proposal. You've taken trauma and turned it into strategy. I had good teachers, Malcolm replied. Marshall leaned back. We can pilot it in 4 cities next quarter. I'll push it through Homeland channels for support. But I want you heading it. Malcolm blinked. Me? You've earned it. Who better to rebuild the bridge than the man who got thrown off it? Malcolm looked at Nina. She nodded. He turned back. I'll do it. On one condition. Marshall raised an eyebrow. Which is? You issue a federal directive. Mandatory vetting and psychological debrief for all police officers who've served overseas. You want to know why they snap? Ask what they brought home with them. Marshall nodded slowly. Done. The meeting ended with a handshake. A real one. Back in Columbus, Malcolm felt a new rhythm forming. He worked during the day, calls, drafts, planning meetings. At night, he and Nina cooked together. Simple meals. Often silent but warm. They started walking in the park on Sundays. He talked more. She listened. Then she talked. He listened more. Once, while sitting by the river, Nina asked, "What scares you most?" He answered without thinking, "That I'll be remembered only for the worst thing that happened to me." She took his hand. Then keep writing the next chapter. But peace, Malcolm knew, was never permanent. 10 days before the pilot program launched, a new video went viral. Another man. Another city. Another mistaken identity. The country erupted again. But this time something changed. Instead of protests alone, people called for Sentinel. Cities requested briefings. Police chiefs quoted Malcolm by name. And amid it all, he returned to that same mall in Columbus. Same corridor. Same tile floor. Devin was still there, promoted now. They shook hands. "I never thanked you properly," Malcolm said. "You never needed to," Devin replied. "You stood back up. That was thanks enough." Malcolm looked at the ATM, the camera above, the faint scuff mark still visible on the floor. Then he reached into his pocket and placed one of his medals on the tile. Not as a memorial. As a marker. This is where it changed. Not the world. But him. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. It had been 6 months since the incident at the River Park Mall. 6 months since Malcolm Reed's face filled every screen, his story triggering a nationwide conversation about race, justice, and who gets the benefit of the doubt. The headlines had shifted since then, as they always do. The hashtags faded, replaced by newer causes, fresh outrage, different names. But Malcolm remained. Still walking the same line between recognition and invisibility. Still carrying the weight of what happened, not just to him but to those who came before and after. Yet something had changed. Not the world. Not completely. But something. His pilot project, Sentinel, had launched in 4 cities: Columbus, Baltimore, Phoenix, and Memphis. Each precinct received a team of veteran advisors. Each officer underwent trauma workshops. Every civilian complaint was now followed up with a community debrief, a conversation, not just a report. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was his. On a cool morning in early May, Malcolm stood at a podium once more. Not at a press conference. Not for damage control. But at a graduation ceremony, his first cohort of veteran liaisons completing their training. He looked out at the small crowd. 40 men and women. All former service members. Many had visible injuries, missing limbs, burns, eye patches. Others carried hidden wounds, deep and invisible. "You don't wear capes," Malcolm said. "You don't need to. Because you walk into chaos and bring calm. You take the sharpness of memory and shape it into understanding." The room was silent but attentive. "You'll be ignored at first," he continued. "Dismissed. Maybe even mocked. But the first time you stop a bad encounter before it escalates, the first time you look a young officer in the eye and say, 'I've seen worse and I know you can do better,' you'll know why this matters." Applause broke out. Malcolm stepped down, shaking hands, taking photos, nodding at faces he'd never forget. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, a man approached him, older, bald, lean, with piercing blue eyes and a slight tremor in his hand. His posture was military, but his eyes were tired. "You don't remember me, do you?" the man said. Malcolm studied him. "No, I'm afraid I don't." "Sergeant Eric Voss," he said. "We crossed paths in Ramadi. You pulled me out after a roadside hit." Malcolm blinked. "I still remember what you said," Voss continued. "You told me, 'Don't die before you come home.' I didn't understand it then. I do now." They shook hands, both gripping harder than necessary. Malcolm's voice was soft. "Glad you made it." Voss nodded. "Glad you kept going." That night, Malcolm sat alone in his apartment, the city quiet outside his window. He didn't turn on the news. He didn't check his emails. He just sat and listened. To the silence. To the absence of chaos. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was close. 1 week later, Malcolm got a phone call from an unknown number. He answered out of habit. "Reed." "Hi," a woman's voice said. Hesitant. I wasn't sure you'd pick up." He froze. "Lila?" Silence. Then, "Yes." He swallowed. "How?" "Nina gave me your number," she said. "I didn't want to call right away. I wasn't sure if I didn't want to interrupt. You wouldn't be." Another pause. "I saw the video," she said. "Everyone did. But I didn't see the man I used to know. I saw someone new. Someone older. Quieter. But still standing." He closed his eyes. "I've had a lot of practice." "I read your proposal," she added. "Nina showed me. It's beautiful. You always knew how to fix things. Just not yourself." "That's still a work in progress," he said. She gave a soft laugh. "Why now?" he asked. "Because Nina's moving to D.C., she replied. "She got an internship. Something about education policy. She wants to be near you." Malcolm felt his heart squeeze. "She asked if we could all have dinner. Together. Just once." He didn't respond right away. Then, "I'd like that." "Me too," Lila whispered. They set a date. Dinner was awkward. But only at first. They met at a small restaurant near Malcolm's apartment, neutral ground, quiet atmosphere. Nina arrived first, bringing a pie she'd baked from a YouTube recipe. Lila came in moments later, dressed in soft gray, her hair streaked with silver but still graceful, still strong. They hugged. Tentatively. The conversation began with small talk, weather, traffic, housing prices. then shifted to childhood memories, to the times they thought about calling, to the things they never said. "I hated you," Malcolm said once, voice low, "for taking her away. I hated you," Lila replied, "for making me feel alone while you were still alive." They didn't argue. They just nodded, because the pain was real and shared, but not permanent. By dessert, they were laughing, and by the time the check came, Lila had placed a hand gently on his. "You look tired," she said. He smiled. "I'm tired of hiding." "Good." Back in his apartment, Malcolm opened his laptop and began drafting a new document. Not a policy, not a report, a letter to the officers who had attacked him. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was a mirror. "You didn't see me. You saw your fear, your biases, your ghosts. I've seen men paralyzed by the same things overseas. But there, we had names for it. PTSD. Hypervigilance. Here, we call it protocol. I don't hate you. I pity the system that trained you to react, but not to ask. If you ever want to talk, really talk, I'm here. But don't come to apologize. Come to understand." He signed it and sent it to the Columbus PD. That summer, Malcolm was invited to testify before Congress. They wanted his insight on national policing reform. He wore a simple suit, spoke plainly, told his story again, but not as a victim, as a builder, as someone who believed the system could be reimagined. And after he spoke, a young congresswoman from Georgia leaned into the mic and said, "Mr. Reed, thank you for not choosing revenge. Thank you for choosing the harder thing, to stay." He nodded, because staying hurt more than walking away. But it healed more too. That fall, Sentinel expanded to 12 cities. Malcolm became the unofficial face of a growing movement, not loud, not flashy, but steady, grounded. And every now and then, someone would stop him on the street. A father with a son who wanted to join the force. A veteran struggling with anger. A young black boy who said, "You look like my grandpa." Each encounter chipped away at the pain and built something stronger in its place. One evening, Malcolm visited the River Park Mall again. Not for an event, not for a meeting, just to see it. The ATM corridor had a new mural now, commissioned by the city. It depicted a silhouette standing with one leg and one prosthetic, head held high, with a backdrop of folded flags and growing trees. At the bottom, a quote, "Do not die before you come home." Malcolm stared at it for a long time. Then he walked up, reached into his coat, and placed something small on the base of the mural. His badge. The one from the Department of Defense. He stood in silence for a moment, then turned, and walked away. The cameras weren't rolling. The crowd was gone. But the world somewhere had shifted. Again. 1 year had passed. 12 cities now ran full Sentinel programs. Police precincts reported noticeable reductions in civilian complaints and use of force incidents. Veteran liaisons had become respected members of their communities. Public trust, once fractured, was slowly being stitched back together, not by policy, but by presence. Consistent, human, real. Malcolm Reed had become a name known in every circle that discussed policing, justice, or reform. News shows still played the clip of his fall, but now it was always followed by a voiceover. From tragedy, he built something new. Yet Malcolm himself was quieter than ever. He'd stepped away from interviews, declined awards, turned down a documentary deal. He didn't want to be a brand. He just wanted to work. His days were filled with travel, quiet visits to new precincts, private one-on-one trainings with hesitant officers, tough conversations with community leaders. He no longer needed to lead from the podium. He led from the back of the room, with a notebook in one hand and the weight of lived experience in the other. The veterans who joined Sentinel called him Iron Soul, not because of his prosthetic leg, but because of how he carried others without letting them feel the weight. But Malcolm was tired. He knew it even if he never said it. His body ached more. His sleep was thinner. Some days, when he walked past mirrors, he barely recognized the face that looked back. Lined, weathered, quiet around the eyes. He had done what he came to do. Now maybe it was time to go home. He made the decision on a Thursday morning in June, after visiting a police training center in Atlanta. A young officer, 22, fresh-eyed, nervous, had stayed behind after the session. "Sir," he'd said, "do you think people can really change?" Malcolm had paused before answering. I don't think change is something that just happens, he said. I think it's something you choose. Over and over. Every day. The kid nodded. Then added, You changed me. Malcolm smiled, shook his hand, and walked out into the sunlight. That night, he booked a one-way ticket back to Columbus. Nina met him at the airport, her hair now dyed purple at the ends, her smile still soft but stronger. You're staying? She asked. He nodded. I think I've seen enough. She drove him home, where the apartment looked just as he'd left it. Clean, sparse, the same couch, the same photo of him in uniform, but it felt warmer now, lived in, safe. They sat on the balcony that night, watching the stars poke holes in the darkness. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The war? No, he said. But sometimes, I miss who I was there. Simple. Clear. You're still clear, she said. Just heavier. He chuckled. That's one way to put it. Then she turned to him. So what now? He didn't answer. Not right away. But a week later he showed her. Malcolm opened a community center. Not big. Just a reclaimed space in a quiet corner of the city. An old warehouse renovated with donated labor and city grants. The sign above the door read, The Armory. Inside, rooms for group meetings, therapy sessions, conflict resolution training. Walls covered with photos of veterans, community members, officers shaking hands. In the center of the main hall, a quote carved in wood. Peace is built in the space between pain and understanding. The center welcomed everyone. Veterans, cops, kids, single parents, people on parole, people lost in addiction. No one was turned away. Malcolm spent most mornings there, helping set up chairs, brewing coffee, listening. Sometimes he spoke. Often he didn't have to. Just being there was enough. People began to come not because of what happened to him, but because of what he did with it. Then, one afternoon in October, while cleaning up after a youth workshop, he collapsed. Not dramatically, just quietly, as if his body finally decided it had carried enough. He was taken to the hospital where tests showed a cardiac issue, part stress, part hereditary, part years of wear and tear. He stayed for 3 days. Nina stayed with him. When he woke the first morning, he looked at her and said, Don't let this place shut down. It won't, she said, holding his hand. Because you're not done yet. He smiled faintly. I think I might be. She leaned in. You don't get to decide that. He recovered. Slower than before. More rest. Less travel. He let the younger team members run the programs now. He watched from the side. Proud. He and Lila had dinner every other Sunday. No labels. Just companionship. Sometimes they talked about the past. Sometimes they just listened to the silence. One evening, she brought over an old photo. Malcolm holding baby Nina, both of them laughing. We were good, weren't we? She asked. He nodded. We were. And we still are, she said. He didn't argue. Years passed. The world moved on. The protests changed shape. The conversations shifted. Sentinel became a permanent part of federal training grants. Malcolm's name was still on the documents, but he no longer needed to be in the room. His work spoke for itself. Young officers in distant cities quoted his speeches in training. Veterans wore his patch on their jackets, Iron Soul, as a symbol of redemption. The incident at the ATM became a historical footnote. But the mural at the River Park Mall remained. The quote stayed. And every year, on the anniversary of that day, someone, different each time, left something at the base of the mural. A folded flag, a badge, a note. One year it was a titanium prosthetic. No one knew who left it, but Malcolm saw it on the news, and he understood. In his final years, Malcolm lived quietly. He tended a small garden behind the armory. Tomatoes, basil, sometimes sunflowers. He wrote letters, hundreds of them, to people who reached out. Some asked for advice. Some offered thanks. Some just needed to tell someone they were still here. He wrote back to every single one, always ending with the same line, "Don't die before you come home." When he passed away, peacefully in his sleep, the news broke quietly. No headlines, just a ripple. a whisper among those who knew. His funeral was held at the armory. Standing room only. Nina gave the eulogy. She didn't read from a page. She didn't need to. My father wasn't a perfect man, she began. He was broken, and tired, and too quiet sometimes. Pause. But he was never bitter. He took what hurt him and turned it into healing for others. He never asked to be a hero. So we made him one. She looked out over the crowd, veterans, officers, children, strangers. Everywhere he went, he made people feel safe. And I think that's the closest thing to justice we get in this life. The city renamed the street outside the armory Malcolm Reed Way. Each year, on the anniversary of his passing, the doors stayed open all night. They called it the Watch. People came and lit candles, told stories, read his letters, played the only clip he ever allowed on repeat, his speech from the press conference. And the final line, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking you to look again. And this time, see me. Years later, a boy stood in front of the mural at the River Park Mall, now refurbished and part of a public art walk. He was 11, wore a baseball cap and scuffed sneakers. His mother stood beside him. Who was he? The boy asked. His mother smiled. He was a soldier. But more than that, he was someone who didn't stay quiet when it mattered. Was he famous? No, she said. He was something better. The boy didn't understand then. But one day he would. Malcolm Reed's story didn't end in that ATM corridor. It didn't end with the fall, or the badge, or the mural. It lived on. In every officer who paused before drawing their weapon. In every veteran who found purpose in peace. In every child who grew up learning that strength isn't power. It's restraint. It's compassion. It's standing when you could walk away. And above all, it's coming home. True justice begins when we choose empathy over judgment. Malcolm Reed's story reminds us that dignity, respect, and humanity must never be conditional. In a world quick to assume and slow to listen, we must become the ones who see. Not just with our eyes, but with our hearts. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Like to honor Malcolm's courage. Share this message so others can see what justice truly looks like. And subscribe for more powerful true stories that need to be heard. Your support helps us keep telling what matters.